Perfect. We've got our default values. So now one by one, let's set up the filters. Now the reason why I'm setting up everything one by one, because I think it's just going to be easier for you to follow along if we don't dump all of them at once. And the way we'll set this up, we're going to navigate back to the filter context. And remember, we have a value that we're passing down, and we right away have the state. So we shouldn't worry about the filters. However, there's going to be two more methods, and I would want to right away set them up as placeholders. So that way I can pass them down, since we'll start by, again, destructuring everything in the filters component. So for the time being, they're just going to be placeholders. And then eventually, of course, we'll add more functionality. The first method name will be update and filters. And this one will be equal to my arrow function. Now I'm going to be looking for event object. And you can think of this function as a function we're going to call every time we change something. So we'll add on change on all of them, on all our inputs. And then the moment something changes, this is the function we're going to invoke. So the moment we click on our filters, we'll invoke this function. And I can tell you right away that it's going to be extremely similar to the update sort. That's why also the naming is somewhat similar. And then also I would want to clear filters, which essentially just sets back the filters back to the defaults. And you can already guess that, of course, we'll invoke it once we click on this clear filters. And let's name it exactly that, clear filters, and we'll just dispatch an action. Now at the moment, I'm not going to worry about this action. We're just going to have a empty arrow function. And once we have both of these suckers in place, now I would want to add them to my value. So update filters and then comma, clear filters as well. And then, like I said, we just need to navigate back to the filters. At the moment, I just have my heading 4, and I'll start by grabbing my context. And now I would want to destructure all of those things out of the state. So remember, we have filters object, and then I would want to get all those default ones. Plus, I would want to get both of the methods and all the products as well. And you'll see why we actually need all the products. And I'll start here with a wrapper just so I have a better looking component over here. And let me see. I'm going to navigate right now to the products just so we can see right away here side by side. This should be our filters. Beautiful. And then, like I said, we have use filter context. Of course, that is the hook that provides our context. And then we have few functions. We have get unique values, format price, as well as the icon from React icons. And as far as this one, the function get unique values, of course, we'll work on it. And then format price, I just used it when I was setting up my range. So let's start with annoying work where I would want to destructure that from the use filter context. So use filter context, I invoke my hook. Of course, I have access to whatever I have in the value. And more specifically, I have my state, of course. And in that state, I have the filters property. And that is an object itself. So then I go by text, category, and then one by one company, whatever names we had over there. Color, min underscore price, and then max underscore price, as well as the shipping. So all of those properties I'm getting out of the filters object. Awesome. And also, like I said, I would want to get all my methods. So update filters, clear filters, as well as all products. So all products, and all products is going to be used when we're getting those unique values. So I'll save it over here, and then we'll just scroll down a little bit where we have the wrapper, and we'll start by setting up a div with a class of content over here. And then inside of this content, let's go right away with form. And since it's going to be form, I also have this default action where essentially once we press on enter, we refresh the page, and I would want to avoid that. That's why I'll say on submit over here, and we'll just set up our arrow function. So once we submit the form, I would want to prevent the default. That's all I would want to do because everything else we're controlling in a state. Or the moment we're not, but eventually we will. So in here, let's just pass in the arrow function. I'll pass in my event object, and we simply say prevent default. And again, the only reason why we're doing that because we'll be setting up the form, and the default behavior of the form is once we submit the form, of course, there's a hard page refresh, and I don't want that. That's why I'll right away prevent that default. And then inside of this form, like I said, I'll set up everything one by one. And the first one is the search input. So we're going to go here with search input, copy and paste, and we'll set it up as end of search input. And then I just want to go with div with the class of form control. So this is just for styling. So all of them look somewhat the same. And then inside of this div, I'm going to go with my input, which is just going to be a text input. Now, what's important is to have a name, and this name needs to have the same exact value like we have in the state. So remember filter context? Remember when we were setting up those default values? So text needs to match exactly what you have over here. Make sure. So if you have different name, please make sure that the name attribute has that same exact value. So in here we have type text. Name is also a text. And then let's go with placeholder. And as far as the placeholder, I'll say search over here. And as far as the styling, we're going to go with search, and then hyphen and input. So save it. At the moment, it is not controlled input. That's why nothing is happening. But, and by the way, why I'm setting up clear filters, this should be class name. That's why we have no styling. Once we add class name properly, notice we have nice styling, but this is not controlled input. Hopefully we all understand that. Now, in order to set this up as controlled input, we needed what? We needed a value. So the value attribute with our default value coming from the state. And the second one was, of course, the on change. So once something changes, then I would want to run my update filters, correct? So let's do it, people. We're going to go with value. So this is going to be my empty string coming from the state. And then the second thing is going to be my on change. And now, of course, I would want to run my update filters method. Beautiful. That's a perfect start. So now, of course, we would want to navigate back to the filter context and add some functionality in the update filters. Because at the moment, yes, I can type some values over here, but notice since we're not running the update filters, nothing is happening in my state. Because I get my value from the state, that is set to be empty string. That's why whatever we type over here is not displayed. And again, that's something we have done already before, where I'm going to scroll down. I purposely getting the event object. And remember, using that event object, I can access the input or a element that is calling that on change. So in this case, it is an input, but of course, later it's going to be buttons, it's going to be checkboxes, and all that. And let's just start simply saying name, and we're going to grab the event target. So that gets me that element. And then since I added the name attribute in the filters, remember, I had name attribute, and it was set equal to text. So this value should be in my dot name. So I can access the name. And the second thing, of course, I would also want to get the value. So whatever I'm typing. So I'm going to go here with let value is equal to event target and then the value. And again, let's start simply by just console logging. So name and then the value. So I'm going to navigate to the bigger screen, and here I'll open up my console. And as we're typing, we should see in the console those values. Notice. So this is going to be the name, which of course is the text, and this is the value that I'm typing. So now, of course, I would want to dispatch an action that again changes that state value, something that we did already in the sort. And the way we do that, in this case, it does matter the name. Remember, previously I said I showed you how to access the name, but actually, since there was only one value, I passed in as a payload my value. Now, in this case, it does matter because filters is an object with multiple properties. And I would want to change only the property that matches to the element, to the value of the name that is coming from the element. So in here, let's go with dispatch, and the type is going to be equal to update filters, update, and then underscore filters. And again, the action is coming from actions.js. And in this case, payload will be an object because there's two properties that I would want to pass in. I would want to pass in my name and my value. So both of these suckers over here. And now, of course, we would need to navigate to filter reducer and handle it over there. So we're going to go to filter reducer. We're going to keep on scrolling. And of course, we will set up our action. So if the name of the action is update filters, so if action.type is equal to update filters, what I would want to do? Well, then I would want to destructure both of these things from the payload because, of course, I'm passing it as a object. So in here, let's go with const, and we're looking for name and the value, and that is coming from action and, of course, dot payload. And in the filters, I would want to update those values, just like we did when we worked with sort. Remember previously here, we had update sort, and we just set that sort value to whatever is coming as a payload. Now, in this case, of course, it's a little bit different because filters is an object itself. So we're going to go here with return. First, I would want to return my whole state, just in case there's some other properties, which of course we have. Then remember, filters was an object. So again, we need to do the same dance where we go with dot, 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 and then state filters. So we don't lose out any other values. And then finally, if I would want to access the property dynamically, I simply go with name. So whatever I'm passing in, and then the value. Again, if you need to refresh on how to set up dynamic properties, please go to my JavaScript Nugget series where I cover this in greater detail. We have covered this already quite a few times, and since I wouldn't want to repeat myself, I'm just going to say here that we are setting up that property dynamically. Since filters is an object, I'm just saying whatever name value I'm passing in, access that property and set it to my value. Now, in our case, of course, what that means is now I'll have the controlled input. And I'll show you that, of course, in my components, where notice I have my filter provider. That's cool. And then in the filters, check it out. So I have my text over here, right? And once I type something in the search, onChange is invoked. And as I'm invoking the onChange, notice how the state value is also changing. So what's really cool that we're dynamically accessing this state value since we'll have multiple. And that's why we have right now a successful controlled input. And the last thing that I would want to add in this video is the placeholder for the filter product. Remember, when we worked with sort, we had the use effect, correct? We had a use effect where we were sorting products. Now I would want to do the same thing as we are actually updating the filters. So we ran this every time our sort value changed, as well as the product. Now I would want to do the same thing when my filters change. Now again, we're not going to set up the functionality yet because I would want to leave it as the last thing we do for the filters. But what I would want you to see is that every time we'll run this, our use effect will run and our placeholder will run as well. And then, of course, eventually we'll set up the functionality. So where I have the use effect, not only in dependency array, I'll add products and then state sort, but I'll also add dot and then state and then filter, I believe. Or no, it was filters. My bad. So every time the value in this object changes, of course, I will run this use effect. Now, I can technically jam everything in a sort product, but I much rather would set up another action. So, of course, I created that action already in my action.js, and the name of this action is going to be type and then filter products. Now, again, for time being, there's just going to be a placeholder. Essentially, we'll set up a console log that just logs that you can see that every time we do something in our filters, we run that function. So let me save it over here. And then in the filter reducer, notice right now I'll have big fat error because we're not handling that. So in here, let's say if action then type is equal to filter product, then of course I'll just return a state over here like so. But before I do so, at least for time being, just so I can see that something is happening, I'll say filtering and then product, just so you don't think that I'm cheating. And I would suggest placing a dispatch before the sort product. I think, in my opinion, it just makes a little bit more sense where we're clearly stating that first we filter the product and only then we sort. Because filter will change the amount of products that we're displaying, and then sorting is just responsible for sorting the items as far as the list. So now, of course, I'm going to go to the bigger screen, and I would want you to see that. Notice we right away have filtering products, and then as I'm typing, I'm also calling the function. So we have our first controlled input, which is going to be our text input, and then also every time I set something up in that input, I'm filtering the product, which at the moment is just console logging. That's a great start. And now, of course, we can move on and work on the next filters as well.